You fired a nurse for helping the homeless? Now you've got a problem. Sarah bought a meal for a starving man. For that, she was suspended, but she wasn't going down quietly. Within a week, her story went viral. Protests erupted, and sponsors threatened to pull funding. And when the hospital panicked, Sarah made a demand that changed everything. Sarah Mitchell had spent years pushing through brutal shifts, comforting families, and doing everything in her power to care for her patients. But, apparently, basic human decency wasn't part of St. James Hospital's policy. It was a freezing Tuesday night, the kind where the cold seeped into your bones and didn't let go. Sarah had just finished a long, thankless shift, one full of understaffed chaos, entitled patients, and doctors barking orders like they were royalty. She just wanted coffee and 5 minutes of quiet before dragging herself home. That's when she saw him. Slumped against the wall outside the diner, an elderly man curled into himself, his thin jacket doing nothing against the wind. His hands were shaking, his eyes hollow. And Sarah knew, really knew, that kind of hunger. The kind that didn't just gnaw at your stomach, but sat heavy in your bones. She didn't hesitate. She ordered an extra meal, walked outside, and handed it to him. "Hey, sir, I got you something warm," she said, offering the bag. The man looked at her like she had just given him the world. His fingers trembled as he took it. "Thank you, miss," he whispered. "God bless you." Sarah gave him a small smile and walked away. No big deal, just human kindness. Or so she thought. By morning, everything had changed. The email hit her inbox before she even had time to grab her first cup of coffee. Mandatory meeting 9 a.m. No subject, no details. Just her name and a conference room number. Red flag number 1. Then came the stares. The whispered conversations that died the second she walked past. The way even her closest coworkers suddenly avoided eye contact. Red flags 2, 3, and 4. By the time she stepped into the boardroom, her gut was already screaming. The air inside was icy. A long, polished table, a row of blank, expressionless faces, and then the flicker of a screen. Security footage. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. A grainy black and white video played. The diner, the rain, her, handing over a meal. A man in an expensive suit leaned forward, voice dripping with fake professionalism. "We were informed that you provided a meal to an unauthorized individual near hospital grounds." Sarah blinked. "You mean the homeless man?" "Oh," a woman sighed dramatically, rubbing her temple like she was dealing with a slow child. "Sarah," she said, voice condescending, "do you understand what kind of liability this creates for us? This hospital has a reputation to uphold. We cannot be seen as a charity for every vagrant who wanders near the premises." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Are you serious? He was hungry. I used my own money." The suit shook his head like he was explaining basic math. "It's not about money. It's about the image. If word gets out that our staff is handing out meals to the homeless, soon they'll be camping outside our doors, expecting handouts." Sarah felt her pulse hammering in her ears. "So you're punishing me for feeding someone?" The chairman, a man who looked like he hadn't experienced a single human emotion in years, leaned forward. "We're disciplining you for making decisions that could harm the hospital's reputation. Effective immediately, you are suspended for violating professional conduct guidelines." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Sarah sat frozen. Years of sacrifice. Double shifts. Holding dying patients' hands when no one else was there. And this is what got her punished? Not the understaffing. Not the unsafe working conditions. Not the actual negligence she had seen swept under the rug. No, the problem was her. The problem was kindness. She clenched her fists under the table, willing herself to stay calm. They expected her to accept it, walk out quietly. Maybe cry in her car, maybe send a desperate email begging for her job back, maybe come back humbled and ready to follow their rules. They had no idea who they were messing with. This was just the beginning. Sarah's suspension spread through the hospital like wildfire. Some coworkers whispered their support in hushed voices, afraid to be overheard. Others just kept their heads down, pretending nothing had happened. And then there were the ones who avoided her completely, colleagues who used to chat with her over coffee, now suddenly too busy to make eye contact. But what cut the deepest wasn't the gossip or the silence. It was how the hospital administration treated her, like she was the problem. Not the understaffing, not the endless cost cutting, not the policies that put profits over people. No, she was the one who had to be dealt with. She was the warning to everyone else. Step out of line, show too much humanity, and you're out. Her world turned upside down overnight. No paycheck meant bills stacking up fast. Rent, groceries, utilities. It all loomed over her like a storm cloud. And the worst part? People she once thought were friends were now avoiding her. The same people who used to admire her compassion now didn't even return her texts. It wasn't that they had turned against her, they were just scared. No one wanted to be next. Sarah had spent years taking care of people, but the moment she needed someone in her corner, silence. And then, a week later, she saw him, the man who had unknowingly started all of this. She was walking through downtown, lost in thought, when she spotted him sitting on a cold bench, wrapped in the same tattered jacket. His face was just as tired, just as weathered, but when his eyes landed on her, they lit up. "Miss, you okay?" Sarah barely managed a smile. A lump formed in her throat, choking back everything she wanted to say. He had nothing. No home, no safety, no stability. Yet he was worried about her. "I'm fine," she lied. "How about you?" He shrugged, giving her a tired smile. "Same as always. But I've been praying for you. Heard what happened. Ain't right." Sarah swallowed hard. He had lost everything. And yet, here he was, praying for her, her fists clenched at her sides. The hospital thought they could silence her, thought they could make her regret caring. They had no idea who they were messing with. Sarah wasn't going down without a fight. At first, she didn't know what to do. The hospital had all the power, all the money, all the connections, but they had underestimated one thing, the power of the truth. She took her story online, no filter, no sugarcoating, just raw facts. A nurse, suspended for an act of kindness. A hospital that cared more about profits than people. At first, it was just a few posts, a handful of shares, a couple of sympathetic comments. And then, the internet exploded. #justice for Sarah started trending. People were furious. News stations picked it up. Nurses, doctors, and ordinary people across the country rallied behind her. Because this wasn't just about one meal. This wasn't just about Sarah. This was about every nurse who had ever been overworked and underpaid. Every healthcare worker who had been told to keep quiet while administrators made decisions that hurt patients. Every person who had ever been treated like a number instead of a human being. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get bigger, they did. An anonymous whistleblower, another nurse from St. James, sent Sarah something that made her blood run cold. Internal emails from the hospital board, not just worried about image, not just about reputation. No, they had a strategy. They had been deliberately discouraging acts of charity near the hospital to prevent what they called unwanted elements from tarnishing the experience of premium patients. Translation: they didn't want rich patients to see poor people, and the internet lost its mind. The outrage went nuclear. Protests erupted outside the hospital. Sponsors threatened to pull funding. Lawyers started digging into everything. And then, like vultures sensing their own downfall, the hospital board panicked. 1 week later, the phone rang. "We'd like to formally reinstate you," the hospital spokesperson said, sounding like he was being forced to read from a script. With full back pay and an official apology, Sarah let that sit for a moment. They weren't sorry. They were scared of bad press, of losing donors, of the storm they never saw coming. She could have walked away, found another job, but she wasn't done yet. "I accept," she said, "under one condition." A pause. "What condition?" "You set up a hospital-funded outreach program for the homeless, permanent, with food, medical aid, and warm clothing, and you make it public. People need to see that this hospital actually cares." Silence, a long one, but she knew they had no choice. Oh, by morning, the hospital released its statement, the St. James Outreach Program, a full initiative for those in need. And Sarah? She walked back through those doors not as a victim, but as a woman who won. The first visitor to the new center, the man she had helped that night. He hugged her tight. "You changed the world, miss." Sarah smiled. "No, she said. We changed it together.